People keep calling me a stalker, but if you had seen the world the way I do, you would have chased those 3 seconds too. By the time campus security started recognizing my face, I had already memorized Noah Carter's schedule better than my own. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he shelved returned books on the second floor of the Ashcroft Public Library at exactly 3:15 p.m. Every Saturday morning, he watered the flower boxes beneath the tall front windows before the building opened. Every afternoon, he carried the same stainless steel coffee tumbler with one small dent near the bottom. From the outside, I knew exactly how it looked. A 24-year-old man finding increasingly ridiculous reasons to appear wherever another guy happened to be. I couldn't blame anyone for thinking I had crossed a line. They didn't know the truth. They couldn't. Because how do you explain that someone isn't chasing a person, they're chasing color? I had spent my entire life inside a silent photograph. Doctors called it an exceptionally rare neurological condition. Specialists filled thick folders with scans and impossible theories. My parents spent years driving me across the country, hoping someone could explain why every sunrise looked identical to every thunderstorm, why roses and oceans belonged to the same endless spectrum of gray. Teachers held up colorful flashcards while patiently repeating names I could never truly understand. Red, blue, green, gold. Those words became facts I memorized instead of experiences I lived. I learned that stop signs were supposedly red, grass was supposed to be green, and the American flag contained colors people described with surprising emotion. I smiled politely whenever friends argued about their favorite shades because I had absolutely no idea what they were talking about. Eventually, pretending became easier than explaining. By college, I had perfected the performance. I laughed at colorful jokes. I complimented paintings based on composition instead of pigments. I built a career illustrating children's books entirely through light, shadow, texture, and contrast. Publishers called my style unique. Critics praised the emotional depth, hidden inside monochrome artwork. None of them realized I wasn't making an artistic choice. I simply drew the only world I had ever known. Then, 3 months ago, everything changed because of one accidental collision. I had been reaching for a photography book from the top shelf when another hand brushed against mine. It lasted less than a heartbeat. 3 seconds, maybe less. But in those impossible seconds, the universe exploded. The ceiling above me transformed into something bright beyond imagination. Sunlight poured through the library windows, carrying warmth that suddenly looked alive instead of pale. A vase of flowers near the circulation desk burst into brilliant shades my brain had no names for, yet somehow understood instantly. And then there were Noah's eyes. They caught the afternoon light like something impossible, something warm, something I knew without anyone telling me was beautiful. Before I could breathe, it vanished. The library returned to gray. The flowers died back into ash. The sunlight lost its heartbeat. Noah apologized with an embarrassed smile, picked up his stack of books, and walked away, completely unaware that he had just rewritten everything I believed about reality. I stood frozen beside that shelf for nearly 10 minutes, staring at my own trembling hand, wondering if I had imagined the greatest miracle of my entire life. I told myself it had been a hallucination, sleep deprivation, stress, an optical illusion my desperate brain had invented after another 12-hour workday. Rational people did not discover color because they accidentally touched a stranger in a library. Rational people accepted impossible moments, laughed at themselves, and moved on. I tried, for exactly 48 hours. Then I found myself standing outside Ashcroft Public Library again, with absolutely no reason to be there. I had already returned every borrowed book. I did not need another research article. I certainly did not need to wander through the history section pretending to compare editions I had no intention of reading. Yet there I was, listening for footsteps I somehow already recognized. Noah Carter moved through the aisles with an effortless calm that made the entire building feel quieter. He greeted elderly visitors by name, crouched beside children searching for adventure novels, and somehow remembered where every misplaced book belonged. Watching him became dangerous because it was too easy to forget why I had come, until he reached past me to place a hardcover onto the shelf. His sleeve brushed the back of my hand. The world inhaled. The polished wooden shelves suddenly glowed with rich warmth. The afternoon sunlight spilled across the carpet in dazzling ribbons that seemed almost alive. Outside the tall windows, leaves shimmered with countless shades I had never imagined could exist together. They danced in a gentle breeze while a sky I had only known as pale gray stretched above them with impossible depth. Then it disappeared again. 3 seconds. Exactly like before. I looked down at my wristwatch and started counting every attempt after that. 2.9 seconds when he handed me a library card. 3.1 seconds when our fingertips touched while exchanging a novel. 2.7 seconds after I caught a stack of books before they slipped from his arms. Every encounter became another tiny miracle followed by another unbearable goodbye. I bought a pocket notebook and began filling it with observations no one else would understand. Tuesday, blue sky. 3 seconds. Friday, yellow flowers near the entrance. 2.8 seconds. Sunday, sunset reflected through stained glass. Crimson. I did not know what crimson truly meant, but somehow my mind remembered it even after the colors disappeared. Those notes became more precious than anything I had ever drawn. They were proof that another world existed just beyond my reach. Unfortunately, I was not the only one paying attention anymore. The security guard near the entrance began greeting me with amused suspicion. A graduate student smiled and whispered something to her friend while glancing in Noah's direction. Even the elderly volunteer who organized book donations asked whether I was writing a report about library operations because I seemed to spend an awful lot of time observing the same employee. I forced awkward laughs and invented increasingly ridiculous excuses. I claimed I was researching architecture, then community outreach, then modern catalog systems. Every lie sounded worse than the last. Noah noticed it too. More than once I caught him looking at me with quiet curiosity instead of discomfort. He never appeared frightened or annoyed. If anything, he looked puzzled, as though he could sense that my attention carried sadness instead of obsession. One rainy afternoon, he walked directly toward me with 2 cups of coffee balanced carefully in his hands. He smiled with effortless warmth and asked the question I had secretly feared since the day our lives collided. "I hope you do not mind me asking, Ethan, but have we met somewhere before?" I smiled because it was easier than telling the truth. "I do not think so," I answered, accepting one of the coffee cups without letting our fingers touch. My own caution surprised me. For weeks I had been searching for every possible excuse to brush against him. Yet now that he was standing inches away, looking directly into my eyes, I was suddenly afraid. What if the miracle stopped working? What if those impossible flashes of color had only been borrowed, and one careless moment would prove they had never been real at all? Noah leaned casually against the bookshelf, completely unaware of the storm inside my head. He told me he had noticed I always chose the same reading corner near the large windows. I admitted that I liked the afternoon light, a statement that sounded almost absurd considering I had never truly seen it. He laughed softly and said that was his favorite spot too because the sunlight made the library feel peaceful. Peaceful. I rolled that word around in my mind. Perhaps that was what everyone else had always experienced without realizing how fortunate they were. We talked for nearly 20 minutes that afternoon. About books, about the old architecture downtown, about our favorite coffee shops, about how quiet the library became after 4 o'clock. Every answer Noah gave seemed genuine, effortless, and warm. He was the kind of person who made conversations feel lighter simply by listening. For the first time since our accidental meeting, I caught myself forgetting about color. I was actually enjoying his company. Then an elderly patron approached asking for help finding a biography, and Noah excused himself with an apologetic smile. As he reached for the coffee cup I had been holding for him, our fingertips met for the briefest instant. The miracle returned. The steam rising from the cups shimmered with soft silver and warm amber tones. Noah's sweater transformed into a deep shade that wrapped around him like the evening sky. Beyond the windows, rain had finally stopped, leaving tiny drops clinging to the trees outside. Each one reflected light differently, creating a breathtaking display that lasted no longer than a heartbeat before dissolving back into gray. I no longer gasped when it happened. Instead, I closed my eyes for a moment, forcing my memory to capture every impossible detail before it vanished. Later that evening, I sat alone in my apartment, opening the notebook that had quietly become the most important possession I owned. Instead of writing simple observations, I began sketching, not with accurate colors, because I still could not reproduce them, but with descriptions. Noah's eyes looked warm enough to melt winter. The rain carried tiny lights that felt alive. The sky stretched so endlessly that it almost made breathing easier. None of those sentences would make sense to another person, yet they made perfect sense to me. Days turned into weeks, and my notebook slowly transformed into something less like scientific evidence and more like a diary. At some point, I stopped counting the seconds as carefully. I started looking forward to hearing Noah ask how my latest illustration was going or whether I had discovered another good mystery novel. I even caught myself smiling before entering the library, not because I hoped to see colors again, but because I hoped he would already be there. That realization unsettled me more than anything else. Had I been chasing color all this time, or had color simply been the reason two strangers were given the chance to meet? I did not know the answer. But as I closed the notebook that night, I noticed something strange resting between its pages. A pressed flower had fallen from one of the library books Noah had recommended, and although it looked gray to me once again, I could still remember exactly how beautiful it had been for those precious 3 seconds. The first rumor reached me before the truth ever did. I was flipping through a collection of landscape photographs when I overheard 2 college students whispering near the magazine rack. "I think that illustrator has a crush on Noah," one of them said with a grin. "He practically lives here." The other laughed and replied, "Either that, or he is writing a novel about librarians." I lowered my eyes to the pages, pretending not to hear, but my heartbeat refused to settle. For weeks I had been afraid that people would misunderstand my intentions, and now the misunderstanding had become part of the library's quiet background noise. The strange part was that Noah never seemed embarrassed. If anything, he treated me exactly the same as before. He still recommended books he thought I would enjoy. He still waved whenever I walked through the entrance. He still smiled with the same effortless warmth that somehow made every ordinary afternoon feel different. One evening, after the last visitors had left, he found me standing near the history section staring through the enormous front windows. "You always look outside before you leave," he said. "What are you looking for?" I almost answered honestly. I almost admitted that I was searching for colors that disappeared before I could truly understand them. Instead, I smiled and said, "Maybe I am looking for inspiration." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "Then I hope you find it." As he turned toward the circulation desk, a stack of returned books slipped from his arms. Without thinking, I reached forward to catch the top volume before it hit the floor. Our hands closed around the same hardcover at the exact same moment. The world awakened once again. Evening sunlight poured through the windows in breathtaking ribbons that painted the polished floor with glowing reflections. Outside, the flower boxes Noah cared for every Saturday overflowed with blossoms so vivid that my chest tightened. There, colors seemed almost impossible, each petal carrying a life of its own. Even Noah's smile appeared brighter than the afternoon sky itself. Then, just as quickly, everything faded back into familiar gray. This time I did not step away immediately. I simply stood there, silently mourning another beautiful moment that no one else even realized had existed. Noah tilted his head with gentle concern. "Are you all right?" he asked. I nodded too quickly. "Just a little dizzy." It was becoming my favorite lie. Over the following days, something subtle changed between us. Instead of waiting for chance encounters, Noah began inviting me into conversations. Sometimes he asked my opinion about a newly released novel. Sometimes he wanted advice about a local art exhibit. Once he even asked whether I would recommend a children's book for his young niece because he remembered I illustrated stories for a living. Those conversations stretched longer each week, and somewhere along the way the library stopped feeling like a destination. It started feeling like home. Yet every wonderful moment carried a quiet weight I could not ignore. The more naturally we became friends, the more guilty I felt about the secret I was hiding. Noah believed our growing friendship had happened by coincidence. He did not know that I had spent months arranging my schedule around his, memorizing the days he worked, convincing myself it was only because I wanted to see colors again. Now the reason had become much harder to define. One rainy Friday, while we organized a display of classic American novels together, Noah suddenly laughed and looked directly at me. "Can I tell you something a little strange?" he asked. I smiled, unaware that my entire world was about to shift once again. "Ever since we met," he said quietly, "I have had this feeling that you are carrying something incredibly heavy all by yourself, and I cannot explain why, but I keep wanting to help you carry it." I wanted to answer him with another harmless joke, but the words never came. Instead, I looked down at the books scattered across the display table, hoping silence would hide everything my expression could not. Noah did not rush me. That was one of the things I had quietly come to admire about him. He never filled uncomfortable moments with unnecessary questions. He simply waited, as though every person deserved the chance to find their own words. Some things are difficult to explain, I finally whispered. He smiled gently. The important things usually are. That simple sentence stayed with me long after we finished arranging the novels. It followed me home, echoed through my apartment, and lingered beside the notebook I had filled over the past 3 months. I opened it again, turning page after page. At first it had been nothing more than observations. 3 seconds. Blue sky. Golden leaves. Crimson sunset. But somewhere along the way the entries had changed. They no longer described colors alone. They described Noah. The way he tucked loose books back into perfect rows without thinking. The way he smiled first with his eyes before the rest of his face followed. The way he always stopped to help elderly visitors carry heavy stacks to the checkout desk. My notebook was no longer evidence of an impossible phenomenon. It had quietly become the story of a person I was trying very hard not to fall for. I closed it immediately, unsettled by my own realization. The following week the library hosted a weekend community reading event. Families filled every corner of the building. Children gathered around volunteer storytellers, and local artists displayed paintings along the main hallway. Noah convinced me to exhibit several monochrome illustrations from my latest children's book. Visitors complimented the dramatic shadows and emotional atmosphere of each drawing. One little girl stared at them for a long moment before asking the question every artist secretly fears. Why do you never use colors? Her mother apologized for the bluntness, but I simply smiled. Before I could invent my usual answer, Noah spoke first. Maybe he wants people to imagine the colors for themselves. Everyone nodded, satisfied by the explanation. Everyone except me. I looked at Noah in complete surprise. Somehow he had offered the most beautiful answer anyone had ever given on my behalf, even though it was not the truth. Later that afternoon, after the event finally ended, exhaustion settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had skipped lunch, barely slept the night before, and spent hours smiling through conversations while hiding the constant ache of another gray day. As I bent down to pick up a box of leftover promotional flyers, dizziness swept over me. The room tilted. I instinctively reached for the nearest bookshelf, but my balance disappeared before I could steady myself. The next thing I remembered was hearing Noah call my name with quiet concern. When I opened my eyes, I was sitting in a chair inside the staff office with a bottle of water resting beside me. You scared me, Noah admitted with a relieved smile. I think you just pushed yourself too hard. I apologized repeatedly while reaching for my messenger bag. My hands froze the instant I realized the zipper had come undone during the confusion. The small gray notebook lay open across the desk between us. Noah had clearly been trying to gather my belongings. His expression was not frightened or judgmental. It was simply stunned. I followed his gaze to the pages lying exposed. Every line was there for him to see. Dates. Times. 3 seconds. Blue sky. Yellow flowers. Warm eyes. And beneath dozens of careful entries, one sentence I did not even remember writing. I would gladly spend the rest of my life inside 3 seconds if it meant seeing the world with him. I could not breathe. Every instinct told me to grab the notebook, apologize for everything, and disappear before Noah had the chance to read another word. Instead, I remained frozen, watching his eyes move slowly across the page. The silence felt endless. It was not the uncomfortable silence between strangers. It was the fragile silence before a life changes forever. Noah finally closed the notebook with extraordinary care, as though it contained something too precious to damage. He looked at me, not with fear, not with anger, but with a sadness that somehow hurt even more. Ethan, he said quietly, none of this looks like the notebook of someone trying to scare me. I lowered my eyes, ashamed of secrets I had never intended another person to discover. Then what does it look like? I asked. He rested one hand gently on the cover before answering. It looks like someone trying to hold on to something everyone else takes for granted. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I realized there was no believable explanation left. I had already lost the chance to hide behind awkward excuses or convenient lies. If I wanted Noah to understand, I would have to trust him with the impossible. My voice barely rose above a whisper. I have never seen this world the way you do. He frowned slightly, waiting for me to continue. Since the day I was born, everything has looked exactly the same. Every tree, every flower, every sunrise, every season. They are all different shapes, different shadows, different textures, but never different colors. Noah listened without interrupting. Doctors spent years trying to explain it. My parents never stopped searching for answers. Eventually, everyone accepted that this was simply my reality. I hesitated, struggling to find words that sounded even remotely believable. Then 3 months ago, I bumped into you. Our hands touched for just a moment, and suddenly everything changed. Noah remained completely still. I expected disbelief. I expected polite concern. Instead, he quietly asked, "For how long?" The question startled me. 3 seconds, I answered immediately. Every single time. I described the impossible moments exactly as I remembered them. The glowing afternoon sky, the flowers outside the library windows, rain reflecting light, his eyes catching the sun. I admitted that I had begun arranging my schedule around his, because those few seconds had become the only moments in my life when the world resembled what everyone else had always described. When I finished speaking, embarrassment settled heavily over me. "I know how ridiculous this sounds," I whispered. "You probably think I imagined everything." Noah slowly shook his head. "No," he replied. "I think you believe every word you just told me." That answer alone almost brought tears to my eyes. He believed that I believed it, even if he could not understand it himself. Then something unexpected happened. Noah leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully before speaking again. "Can I tell you something strange?" he asked. I nodded. "Ever since the day we accidentally met, I have noticed something I could never explain. Whenever our hands touched, even for just a second, I always felt different." He searched for the right words. "Not dizzy, not sick, just as if my heart suddenly recognized someone before my mind had the chance to." We stared at one another across the small office, neither of us able to explain what was happening. Finally, Noah smiled with quiet determination and extended his hand across the desk. "Maybe," he said softly, "instead of wondering whether this is impossible, we should find out together exactly what happens if we stop being afraid of it." For a moment, neither of us moved. Noah's hand remained extended across the small wooden desk, steady and patient, as though he understood that accepting it meant far more than a simple handshake. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain he could hear it. Slowly, I reached forward until our fingers met. The familiar miracle arrived exactly on time. Gray dissolved into breathtaking life. Warm afternoon sunlight spilled through the office window in brilliant streams that danced across the floor. The faded coffee mug beside the computer suddenly carried rich colors I had never noticed before. Outside, maple trees swayed beneath an endless sky that seemed so vivid it almost stole my breath. But something was different this time. Neither of us pulled away after 3 seconds. We simply remained there, hands gently clasped, waiting for the miracle to disappear. 1 second passed, then another. 5 seconds. 8. 10. I stared around the room in complete disbelief. The colors remained. They shimmered softly, steady and alive, refusing to fade as they always had before. My eyes filled with tears before I even realized I was crying. "They are still here," I whispered. Noah glanced around the room with a confused smile, unable to understand what I was seeing, yet somehow recognizing how much it meant. "Then keep looking," he answered quietly. "I am not going anywhere." We stayed like that for almost a full minute, before finally letting go. The instant our hands separated, the colors vanished again, leaving behind the familiar gray world I had known my entire life. Yet instead of despair, I felt hope. For the first time, the miracle had changed. It was growing stronger. Over the following weeks, we decided to stop hiding from the impossible and start learning from it. Every Saturday after the library closed, we walked through the botanical garden downtown. Noah would describe every flower while I waited for those brief moments when our hands naturally brushed together. We discovered that longer contact allowed the colors to remain longer than before. Sometimes we sat together on a park bench with our shoulders lightly touching while watching children fly kites across the open field. I memorized every breathtaking shade before it disappeared again. Noah became fascinated by the experiment itself. He asked endless questions. carefully writing down every observation inside a new notebook we shared together. The old notebook had recorded loneliness. The new one recorded hope. One page listed how long the colors lasted. Another described weather conditions. Another simply contained small sketches of places we wanted to visit someday, if the miracle continued growing stronger. It slowly became our project instead of my burden. Then, without warning, everything changed again. One Tuesday afternoon, I arrived at the library expecting another quiet walk together. Noah was waiting near the entrance, but something about his smile felt different. It was still warm, yet it carried a sadness I had never seen before. He held a white envelope in both hands. "I was going to tell you after work," he said softly, "but I do not think I should wait." A strange feeling settled in my chest before he even spoke another word. He handed me the letter. It was from a prestigious archival fellowship in Boston, one of the most competitive library preservation programs in the country. They had accepted him. The opportunity would begin in 6 weeks. It was everything Noah had worked toward for years. Any reasonable friend would have congratulated him immediately. I wanted to. I truly did. Instead, all I could hear was the quiet echo of one terrifying thought. 6 weeks from now, the only person who had ever brought color into my world would be nearly 3,000 miles away. Noah searched my face with uncertain eyes. "I have not accepted it yet," he admitted. "I wanted to talk to you first." At that moment, I realized something that frightened me far more than the possibility of losing colors forever. I was no longer afraid of returning to a gray world. I was afraid of waking up in a world without Noah. For the next several days, I convinced myself that being supportive was the only choice a real friend could make. Every time Noah mentioned Boston, I smiled and told him how proud I was. I congratulated him on earning an opportunity that thousands of applicants dreamed about. I even helped him compare neighborhoods, apartment listings, and train routes near the preservation center. My voice sounded calm every time I spoke, but every sentence felt like I was quietly packing away the brightest moments of my own life. Noah noticed the difference long before I admitted it. We still spent Saturday afternoons together, still walked through the botanical garden, still filled our shared notebook with impossible discoveries. Yet an invisible countdown had begun following us everywhere. 6 weeks became 5. 5 became 4. Each page we added somehow felt heavier than the last. One evening we sat beside the small lake in the park while autumn leaves drifted across the water. Noah gently rested his hand beside mine on the wooden bench. Color immediately flooded back into the world. The lake reflected a breathtaking evening sky. The trees glowed with warm shades that looked almost unreal, and the last rays of sunlight wrapped everything around us in quiet beauty. This time I barely looked at any of it. Instead, I found myself watching Noah smile as he admired the sunset he had seen his entire life. That realization startled me. Months ago, I would have spent every precious second desperately memorizing every color before it disappeared. Now I was memorizing the peaceful expression on his face instead. Noah noticed me staring and laughed softly. "You were supposed to be looking at the sunset," he teased. I smiled without looking away. I already found the best view. The words escaped before I had the chance to stop them. Silence settled between us, not awkward, but honest. Noah lowered his eyes for a moment before quietly admitting, "You have made saying yes to Boston much harder than I expected." My heart sank. "Then do not let me be the reason you say no," I answered immediately. "This fellowship is your dream." He nodded slowly. "It is." I forced another smile. "Dreams should not be abandoned because of someone you met a few months ago." Noah looked at me with an expression filled with gentle disbelief. "Is that really what you think you are?" he asked. I had no answer. The following week his acceptance deadline arrived. He signed the paperwork. I congratulated him with the brightest smile I could manage, and he thanked me with a hug that lasted only a few seconds, but somehow carried more warmth than any color I had ever seen. After that day, I stopped bringing my notebook to the library. There no longer seemed to be a reason to measure miracles that were already slipping away. Instead, I quietly treasured ordinary conversations, shared cups of coffee, and peaceful walks through familiar streets. The colors still appeared whenever we touched, and they lasted longer than ever before, sometimes nearly 2 full minutes, but I no longer chased them. Every second felt bittersweet because I knew exactly how precious they had become. On Noah's final evening before leaving, we locked the library together after the last visitor had gone home. The The streets were calm. The air carried the crisp promise of early winter, and neither of us seemed eager to say goodbye. We reached the front steps and simply stood there beneath the glowing streetlights. Noah slipped something into my hand. It was our shared notebook, now carefully wrapped with a blue ribbon I could only imagine. "Keep it," he whispered, "until we figure out why all of this happened." I held the notebook against my chest, knowing there was only one thing left that I could not leave unsaid. If I stayed silent tonight, I would regret it for the rest of my life. My fingers tightened around the notebook while every reason to stay silent quietly disappeared. I looked at Noah standing beneath the soft glow of the library lights, carrying the future he had worked so hard to earn, and I realized that love was never supposed to become another person's cage. It was supposed to become the courage that helped them walk toward tomorrow. I took one slow breath before finally speaking. When I first started coming here, I thought I was searching for colors. I believed those few impossible seconds were the greatest gift I would ever receive. But somewhere along the way, I stopped counting how long the colors lasted because I started caring much more about how long our conversations lasted. Noah listened without saying a word. "If you leave tomorrow," I continued, "the world might become gray again. Maybe it always will. But that is no longer what scares me the most. What scares me is pretending that meeting you only mattered because of a miracle." My voice trembled despite every attempt to steady it. It did not. "You became the brightest part of my life long before I understood that." For a long moment, Noah simply stood there, his eyes reflecting emotions I could not fully read. Then he stepped closer until only a few inches separated us. "Ethan," he whispered, "do you know why I kept asking you to walk with me every weekend?" I slowly shook my head. He smiled with quiet honesty. "Because every time you looked at ordinary things, you reminded me not to take them for granted. You made me notice sunsets I had stopped noticing years ago. You made flowers feel new again. Somehow, without even seeing colors the way everyone else does, you taught me how to appreciate them." Tears blurred my vision. Noah gently reached for my hand. The instant our fingers met, I instinctively waited for the familiar rush of impossible beauty. 1 second passed, then another. I looked around, expecting the usual explosion of color followed by its inevitable disappearance. Instead, nothing changed. My heart sank. The street, the library, the trees, the sky all remained exactly as they had been. Gray. I forced a small smile, refusing to let disappointment ruin our final evening together. "Maybe the miracle is over," I said softly. Noah squeezed my hand without letting go. "Or maybe," he answered, "it was never meant to last forever." We began walking toward the parking lot in peaceful silence. I kept my eyes on the sidewalk, accepting that perhaps this was the ending every miracle eventually reached. Then Noah suddenly stopped. "Ethan," he said quietly, "look up." I lifted my head without expecting anything at all. The world had changed. Not because our hands were touching. Not because 3 seconds had passed. Color surrounded us naturally, effortlessly, endlessly. The autumn trees shimmered beneath a brilliant evening sky. The library bricks glowed warmly beneath golden lights. Every leaf, every cloud, every distant window carried a beauty that no longer felt borrowed. I released Noah's hand in complete disbelief. The colors remained. I looked at my own trembling fingers. Still there. I blinked repeatedly, terrified they would vanish like every miracle before them. They never did. Noah laughed through tears of his own. "You are still seeing them, are you not?" I nodded, unable to speak. Months later, Noah left for Boston exactly as planned, and I encouraged him every step of the way. Distance never erased what we had found together. We called every evening, shared photographs of places he explored, and for the first time in my life, I understood every color inside those pictures. I finished illustrating a new children's book unlike anything I had ever created before. Every page overflowed with the vibrant world I had once believed belonged only to other people. At the dedication ceremony, I quietly wrote a single sentence inside the first printed copy before mailing it to Boston. "Thank you for helping me discover that the greatest miracle was never learning to see colors. It was meeting the person who taught me there was already enough light inside my heart to recognize them."